What if the greatest journey humanity dreams of is not defined by distance but by the impossibility of return? When we speak about missions to Mars, the conversation often begins with rockets, propulsion systems, and landing strategies. These are important, but they are not the central challenge. The deeper question is more fundamental. It is biological. Can the human body endure not just the journey outward, but the return journey back to Earth? To understand this, consider a simple comparison. Traveling to Mars is like crossing an ocean. Technology can build the ship. It can calculate the route with remarkable precision. But if the human body slowly weakens during the voyage, then the ship becomes irrelevant. The limitation shifts from engineering to physiology. Current mission designs estimate a travel time of approximately 6 to 9 months each way, depending on planetary alignment. This means astronauts would spend well over a year in space, not including their time on Mars. During this period, they are exposed to conditions the human body did not evolve to handle. The environment of space is not simply empty, it actively alters how the body functions. A useful teaching insight here is this: survival is not just about reaching a destination, it is about maintaining the ability to function under changing conditions. On Earth, gravity constantly provides a stable reference for our muscles, bones, and internal systems. Remove that reference and the body begins to adapt in ways that may not be reversible. This leads us to a critical realization. The challenge of Mars is not only the outward journey, it is the return. If the body changes too much during the mission, returning to Earth's gravity may no longer be possible. In that sense, a mission to Mars begins to resemble something else entirely. Not exploration, but migration. A transition from temporary travel to potential permanence. As we move forward, we must shift our focus. The question is no longer how we reach Mars, it is what happens to the human body along the way, and the first stage of that transformation begins long before Mars comes into view. The first of these changes begins quietly, almost unnoticed, during the long transit through space. Months pass before Mars is even visible, yet the human body has already entered an unfamiliar state. This environment is called microgravity, and it is not simply the absence of weight. It is the absence of a constant force that every biological system on Earth has adapted to over millions of years. To understand its impact, consider how the body behaves on Earth. Every moment, gravity pulls blood downward, anchors muscles and places a steady load on bones. This continuous force acts like a background signal, guiding how the body regulates itself. Remove that signal, and the body does not remain unchanged, it begins to recalibrate. Astronauts in orbit experience what feels like effortless floating. However, this apparent ease masks a deeper disruption. The cardiovascular system no longer needs to work against gravity to circulate blood. As a result, the heart gradually reduces its effort. At the same time, the body interprets the new condition as a state of excess, initiating processes that begin to reduce capacity rather than maintain it. A useful teaching insight here is that the human body is highly efficient, but not always in ways that benefit long-term survival in unfamiliar environments. It continuously optimizes for immediate conditions. In microgravity, this means conserving energy by scaling down systems that appear unnecessary. Scientific observations from missions aboard the International Space Station show that these changes begin within days. Fluid distribution alters, cardiovascular efficiency shifts, and regulatory systems start adjusting to a new baseline. Importantly, these are not isolated effects. They form the foundation of a broader physiological transformation. One might assume that exercise could fully counteract these effects. While astronauts do follow strict daily routines, including resistance and aerobic training, the results are only partial. The absence of gravity cannot be completely replicated through mechanical means. The body recognizes the difference. This leads to an important conclusion. Space is not a neutral environment through which humans simply pass. It is an active force that reshapes the body from the moment the journey begins. As these adaptations progress, their consequences become more visible and more complex. The next stage of this transformation reveals itself not in muscles or bones, but in the movement of fluids within the body, particularly toward the most sensitive organ of all, the brain. As these adaptations continue, their effects begin to concentrate in a more sensitive and less visible system: the distribution of fluids within the body. In the absence of gravity, fluids no longer follow the downward pull that defines circulation on Earth. Instead, they shift upward toward the head. To understand this, imagine standing upright on Earth. Gravity pulls blood and other fluids toward the lower body, and the cardiovascular system constantly works to maintain balance. In microgravity, this directional pull disappears. The body no longer distinguishes clearly between upper and lower regions. As a result, fluids redistribute in a way that the body was never designed to manage. Astronauts often describe a sensation of fullness in the face, sometimes referred to as puffy face syndrome. At the same time, the legs appear thinner due to reduced fluid volume. While this may seem like a minor cosmetic effect, it reflects a deeper physiological shift. Increased fluid in the upper body leads to elevated pressure within the skull. This pressure directly affects the brain and, more critically, the eyes. Clinical observations have documented changes in vision during long-duration missions. Some astronauts experience blurred vision that persists even after returning to Earth. This condition, now studied under spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome, indicates that structural changes may be occurring within the eye itself. A useful teaching insight here is that the human brain exists within a carefully regulated pressure system. Even small deviations can influence function. On Earth, gravity assists in maintaining this balance. In space, that regulation must rely entirely on internal mechanisms, which are not always sufficient over extended periods. Headaches, visual distortion, and a sense of internal pressure are not isolated symptoms. They are indicators that the body's internal equilibrium is being challenged. More importantly, these effects are not yet fully understood. Long-term data is limited, and the potential for lasting neurological impact remains an open question. This introduces a layer of uncertainty that extends beyond discomfort. It suggests that space travel may influence not only physical strength, but also perception and cognitive stability. As we continue forward, the focus shifts from internal pressure systems to structural support. The same absence of gravity that redistributes fluids also removes the load-bearing demands placed on muscles, initiating another stage of adaptation that is both rapid and unavoidable. As internal systems continue adjusting to the absence of gravity, the effects begin to extend outward into the body's structural framework. The next stage of this transformation is not hidden within pressure systems or fluid balance. It is visible, measurable, and progressively debilitating. It occurs in the muscles. On Earth, muscles are in constant use, even during simple activities such as standing or maintaining posture. Gravity ensures that the body must continuously engage its muscular system to remain stable. This constant demand acts as a form of natural training, preserving both strength and endurance without conscious effort. In microgravity, this requirement disappears. The body no longer needs to support its own weight. Movements become effortless, and large muscle groups, particularly those in the legs and lower back, are used far less frequently. From the body's perspective, maintaining this unused tissue becomes inefficient. A useful teaching insight is that the human body follows a principle of adaptive efficiency. It strengthens what is used and reduces what is not. In space, this principle leads to a gradual but consistent loss of muscle mass, a process known as atrophy. Scientific measurements from space missions show that astronauts can lose up to 20% of their muscle mass on long-duration flights. This decline begins within the first few weeks and continues despite structured exercise programs. Even with specialized equipment designed to simulate resistance, the absence of true gravitational load cannot be fully replicated. The consequences are not limited to strength alone. Muscle fibers change in composition, endurance decreases, and coordination becomes less reliable. Tasks that require stability or sustained effort become increasingly difficult. Consider a simple example. Standing up on Earth requires coordinated activation of multiple muscle groups working against gravity. After prolonged exposure to microgravity, this once automatic action becomes physically demanding. The body must relearn how to operate under conditions it has gradually adapted away from. This stage of adaptation is particularly significant because it directly affects mobility. Without sufficient muscle strength, even basic movement becomes a challenge, especially when transitioning back to a gravitational environment. As muscle loss progresses, another more permanent structural issue begins to emerge. The body's support system does not rely on muscles alone. Beneath them lies a framework that is even more vulnerable to the absence of gravity, the skeletal system. As the loss of muscle strength progresses, the body begins to rely more heavily on its deeper structural framework. However, this framework is not stable in the absence of gravity. In fact, it is even more vulnerable. The next phase of adaptation affects the bones, which are designed to bear weight continuously under Earth's gravitational pull. On Earth, bones are living tissues that constantly remodel themselves. They respond to stress. When subjected to regular load, they maintain density and strength. This is why activities such as walking or lifting even modest weight are enough to preserve skeletal integrity over time. In microgravity, this essential stimulus disappears. Bones no longer experience the compressive forces that signal the body to maintain them. As a result, the balance between bone formation and bone resorption shifts. The body begins to break down bone tissue faster than it can rebuild it. A useful teaching insight is that bone is not a static material like steel or concrete. It is dynamic. It adapts to demand. When demand is removed, the structure weakens not by damage but by design. Scientific data from long-duration space missions shows that astronauts can lose approximately 1 to 2% of their bone density per month. This rate is significantly higher than what is observed in age-related bone loss on Earth. In effect, the body enters a state similar to accelerated osteoporosis. Calcium released from the bones does not simply disappear. It enters the bloodstream and is eventually excreted, which introduces additional complications, including an increased risk of kidney stone formation. This illustrates that the effects are not isolated to the skeleton, but extend to broader metabolic systems. The weakening of bones has direct mechanical consequences. Reduced density means reduced strength. Even minor impacts or stresses that would be harmless on Earth can become significant risks in a weakened state. Consider a simple scenario. Standing, walking, or absorbing the force of a step requires bones to handle repeated stress. After prolonged exposure to microgravity, the same actions demand a level of structural support the body may no longer be able to provide. This stage of change is particularly concerning because bone recovery is slow and, in some cases, incomplete. Unlike muscles, which can regain strength relatively quickly with training, bones require extended periods of proper loading to rebuild density. As this degradation continues, the effects begin to influence not only strength but also alignment. The skeletal system does not operate in isolation. Its structure supports posture, balance, and the positioning of the entire body, leading us to the next level of adaptation involving the spine itself. As bone density continues to decline, the consequences begin to extend beyond strength and into the fundamental structure of the body itself. The skeletal system does not merely provide support. It defines alignment, posture, and the spatial organization of the entire human form. When gravity is removed, this structure begins to shift in subtle but significant ways. One of the most noticeable changes occurs in the spine. On Earth, the spine is constantly compressed by gravity. This compression keeps the vertebrae closely aligned and maintains a stable curvature. In microgravity, this compressive force is absent. As a result, the spaces between the vertebrae expand slightly. Astronauts often experience an increase in height of up to a few centimeters during space missions. While this may appear beneficial at first glance, it is not a sign of improved health. It reflects a redistribution of structural tension within the spine. The supporting muscles, already weakened, are less capable of maintaining proper alignment. A useful teaching insight here is that structure and force are inseparable in biological systems. The shape of the body is not fixed. It is continuously maintained by the forces acting upon it. When those forces change, the structure adapts, sometimes in ways that introduce instability. The elongation of the spine can lead to discomfort and pain. Many astronauts report persistent back issues both during and after missions. In some cases, these changes contribute to long-term posture problems that do not fully resolve upon return to Earth. The absence of gravity also affects how the body perceives orientation and balance. The spine plays a central role in coordinating movement and maintaining equilibrium. When its alignment shifts, the entire system of movement becomes less reliable. Consider a simple example. Standing upright on Earth requires the spine to distribute weight evenly while coordinating with muscles and joints. In microgravity, this coordinated system is no longer practiced. Over time, the body loses familiarity with its own structural balance. These changes are not isolated events. They interact with the ongoing loss of muscle strength and bone density, creating a compounding effect. The body is not only becoming weaker, it is becoming structurally different. As this transformation continues, the environment itself begins to change once again. The journey does not end in microgravity. It leads to a new gravitational condition, one that is neither Earth nor space, but something in between. This next stage occurs upon arrival at Mars, where gravity returns, but not in the way the human body expects. As this prolonged transformation unfolds, the journey reaches a point where gravity returns, but not in the form the human body was designed to handle. Arrival on Mars introduces a new condition, one that sits between the extremes of Earth and space. It is neither the complete absence of gravity nor the familiar pull of home. It is partial gravity, approximately 38% of what we experience on Earth. At first glance, this may seem like a relief. After months in microgravity, any gravitational force appears beneficial. Movement becomes more intuitive. Objects have weight again and orientation regains meaning. However, this improvement is only partial, and the body continues adapting in ways that do not fully reverse earlier changes. To understand this, consider how the body responds to reduced demand. On Earth, gravity provides a constant baseline that keeps muscles engaged and bones under stress. On Mars, this baseline is significantly lower. The body recognizes this reduced load and continues optimizing accordingly. A useful teaching insight is that adaptation does not distinguish between temporary and permanent environments. The body adjusts to what it experiences consistently. If the gravitational load is lower, the body maintains only the level of strength required for that environment. As a result, muscle weakening does not stop upon arrival. It continues, although at a different rate. Bones also remain understimulated, leading to further reductions in density. The cardiovascular system, which has already adjusted to microgravity, must now recalibrate again, this time to a weaker gravitational pull. Scientific estimates indicate that Mars gravity is sufficient to allow basic mobility, but insufficient to preserve full Earth-level physiological function. This creates a transitional state where the body is functional, but not fully supported. Consider a simple example. Walking on Mars requires less effort than on Earth, but this reduced effort means that muscles are not challenged to the same extent. Over time, this leads to further deconditioning rather than recovery. This stage marks a critical shift. The body is no longer adapting to space alone. It is adapting to a new planetary environment, one that encourages a different baseline of strength, endurance, and stability. As this adaptation continues, an important question begins to emerge. If the body becomes fully adjusted to Mars, what happens when it is exposed once again to Earth's gravity? This question leads directly to the most critical phase of the journey, the possibility that returning home may no longer be physically achievable. The body settles into the conditions of Mars. A critical threshold begins to approach, one that is not immediately visible but carries profound consequences. Adaptation, which once served as a mechanism for survival, now introduces a new limitation. The more completely the body adjusts to reduced gravity, the less capable it becomes of functioning under stronger gravitational forces. To understand this, consider how the human body responds to increasing physical demand. On Earth, gravity constantly challenges the cardiovascular system, the skeletal structure, and muscular strength. The heart must pump blood against this force, bones must support full body weight, and muscles must sustain continuous resistance. These demands define what the body considers normal. After prolonged exposure to Mars gravity, this definition changes. The body recalibrates its baseline to a lower level of demand. The heart adapts to pump with less effort. Bones maintain only the density required for reduced weight. Muscles preserve strength only to the extent necessary for movement in a lighter environment. A useful teaching insight is that adaptation is not reversible by intention alone. The body does not retain unused capacity indefinitely. it reduces it. This efficiency becomes a limitation when conditions change again. Returning to Earth would require an immediate and significant increase in physiological demand. The heart would need to work harder to circulate blood effectively. Bones would suddenly be required to support nearly 3 times the load they have adapted to on Mars. Muscles would need to generate forces they have not sustained for extended periods. Scientific projections suggest that this transition could result in severe fatigue, loss of balance, and increased risk of fractures. Even simple actions such as standing upright or walking could become difficult. In more extreme cases, the body may struggle to maintain stable circulation under full gravity. Consider a simple comparison. An individual who has spent months in a low-resistance environment cannot instantly perform high-resistance tasks without strain or injury. The difference here is that the entire body is subjected to this shift simultaneously. This creates a defining moment in the mission. The challenge is no longer reaching Mars or surviving its environment. It is whether the body retains the capacity to return. At this point, the concept of a round-trip mission begins to lose its practical meaning. The journey outward remains achievable, but the journey back becomes uncertain, potentially impossible. This realization shifts the focus once again. If returning cannot be guaranteed, then the question becomes how to prevent these changes, or at least reduce their impact. This leads directly to the exploration of possible solutions and the limits of what current science can offer. Limitations of the human body become clearer. The focus shifts from observation to intervention. If natural adaptation leads to reduced capability, then the logical response is to counteract or control that adaptation. This is where current scientific research is concentrated, not on reaching Mars, but on preserving the human body during and after the journey. One of the most widely discussed approaches is artificial gravity. The concept is straightforward in principle. If a spacecraft can rotate, it can create a centrifugal force that mimics gravity. This force would provide continuous loading on muscles and bones, potentially slowing or preventing many of the changes observed in microgravity. A useful teaching insight here is that the body does not require Earth itself. It requires consistent force. If that force can be recreated artificially, even partially, it may be enough to maintain physiological stability. However, building and maintaining a rotating system in space introduces significant engineering challenges, including structural integrity, energy requirements, and human tolerance to rotational motion. Another approach involves mechanical countermeasures. Specialized suits are being designed to apply constant pressure along the body, simulating the effects of gravity. These suits aim to create resistance during movement, forcing muscles and bones to remain active even in a low-gravity environment. Pharmacological solutions are also under investigation. Medications that slow bone resorption or support muscle retention could reduce the rate of physical decline. On Earth, similar treatments are used for conditions such as osteoporosis. However, their effectiveness in space over long durations remains uncertain. Exercise remains a central component of all current strategies. Astronauts already follow rigorous daily routines that include resistance training and cardiovascular activity. These methods have proven to be partially effective, but they do not fully replicate the continuous load provided by gravity. It is important to recognize that all of these solutions are based on limited data. Most human spaceflight has occurred in low Earth orbit, and for relatively short durations compared to a Mars mission. No human has experienced the complete sequence of microgravity, partial gravity on Mars, and then a return to full Earth gravity. This introduces a fundamental uncertainty. Each proposed solution addresses part of the problem, but none has been validated across the entire mission profile. The question is not whether these methods can help, but whether they are sufficient. As we move forward, the discussion extends beyond science and engineering. If the risks cannot be fully eliminated, then the decision to send humans to Mars becomes more than a technical challenge. It becomes a question of responsibility, intent, and the definition of exploration itself. These uncertainties remain unresolved. The discussion reaches its most fundamental level. The question is no longer limited to biology or engineering. It extends into the domain of human choice. If returning from Mars cannot be guaranteed, then the nature of the mission itself must be reconsidered. At this stage, it becomes necessary to redefine what we mean by exploration. Traditionally, exploration implies departure followed by return. It is a temporary extension of human presence into the unknown. However, the conditions we have examined suggest a different model. A journey to Mars may not be temporary, it may represent a permanent transition. This introduces an ethical dimension that cannot be ignored. Sending humans to Mars would mean accepting the possibility that they may never return, not due to distance alone, but because their bodies may no longer support life under Earth's gravity. In this sense, the mission becomes less about travel and more about relocation. A useful teaching insight is that technological capability does not automatically justify action. The ability to perform a task must be considered alongside its consequences. In this case, the consequence is not only risk but permanence. Those who undertake such a journey would not simply be astronauts. They would become the first individuals in modern history to live beyond Earth without a realistic path back. Their connection to Earth would be informational and emotional rather than physical. Consider the implications of this shift. Communication delays, environmental isolation, and complete dependence on artificial systems would define daily life. Over time, even the concept of home would begin to change, not as a matter of preference, but as a matter of necessity. This raises a deeper question about identity. Human life has always been shaped by Earth's conditions. Gravity, atmosphere, and biological limits have defined how we move, think, and survive. To exist permanently in a different environment is to accept a gradual divergence from those conditions. The challenge, therefore, is not only to reach Mars or to survive there, it is to decide whether we are prepared to accept the transformation that follows. Exploration in this context becomes a commitment rather than a mission. As we conclude, the central idea becomes clear. The boundary we face is not the distance between planets, but the limits of the human body and the choices we make in response to those limits. The future of Mars exploration will not be defined by rockets alone, but by how we answer a simple and profound question. If returning home is no longer possible, who are we willing to become?